Nobody in the NFL saw this coming. Not from Cleveland. Not now. Not with the 2026 NFL Draft literally hours away and the entire football world watching every move the Browns make. Because Jimmy Haslam, the billionaire owner whose decisions have defined, and in many ways destroyed, the Cleveland Browns for the last 14 years, just made a move that has sent trade rumors spiraling in every direction simultaneously. A blockbuster power play. A secret power grab in another sport entirely. A contradiction so stunning, so perfectly timed, so quintessentially Haslam. The man who called the Watson trade a big swing and miss, and then 1 year later stood in front of reporters and said Watson had a great chance for a fresh start. That the entire Cleveland fan base is once again staring at their phones asking the same question they have been asking since 2012. Is Jimmy Haslam genuinely committed to winning here? Or is the Cleveland Browns just one piece of a much larger portfolio to a man who is already moving on to his next billion-dollar toy? To understand what Jimmy Haslam just did, and why it sent trade rumors, front office whispers, and fan anxiety into full-scale chaos, you first have to understand who Jimmy Haslam is. Not the public version. Not the carefully crafted press conference version who stands at a podium in Berea, saying things like, "We share our fans' frustration, and we are 1,000% committed to getting this fixed." You have to understand the real Jimmy Haslam. The one whose decisions have built a monument to dysfunction that stands as arguably the most impressive sustained failure in the history of professional sports ownership. Jimmy Haslam bought the Cleveland Browns in 2012 for a reported $1.1 billion. In the 14 years since that purchase, he has hired 7 head coaches. The previous 6 coaches he hired before Todd Monken compiled a 73-139-1 regular season record, the second worst mark in the NFL over that span. Chattanooga Times Free Press 7 coaches, 6 of them failures, each one arriving with a press conference that sounded exactly like the last one. Exciting language about culture change, about accountability, about getting this thing right, and each one eventually departing in varying degrees of dysfunction, finger-pointing, and mutual embarrassment. There was Hugh Jackson, who went 1-31 in 2 seasons and then, remarkably, joined a division rival's coaching staff. There was Freddie Kitchens, who took a talented roster and somehow made it look worse than the sum of its parts. There was Kevin Stefanski, who actually won something, 2 playoff appearances, 2 Coach of the Year awards, and still got fired after 1 season too many of quarterback catastrophe. 7 coaches, 14 years, 0 playoff wins since 2002, 0 division titles in the post-expansion era. And at the center of every single decision, every hire, every firing, every blockbuster trade, every contract that made football analysts gasp, has been Jimmy Haslam, the owner who got so deep into the day-to-day operations of his own franchise that coaches and general managers operated under the constant weight of his interference. The owner who, according to multiple reports, pushed for an arranged marriage during the most recent coaching search, demanding that the new head coach retain defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz. A directive that caused genuine chaos and apparently drove several top candidates away before the process even reached its conclusion. ESPN Cleveland host Tony Grossi said plainly during the coaching search, "The bottom line why we don't have a head coach is because of the process." And the process, as everyone in Cleveland understood, was Jimmy Haslam. Motorcycle sports. When the Browns ultimately hired Todd Monken, their 7th head coach under Haslam, reports immediately surfaced that GM Andrew Berry had preferred a different candidate but had been overruled by the owner. Yard Barker, the 7th coach of the Haslam era, hired, allegedly, over the preference of the general manager who is supposed to be running the football operation. This is the organizational culture that exists in Cleveland right now. This is the environment in which Andrew Berry is supposed to make rational, long-term, sustainable football decisions at the 2026 NFL Draft. But now, with draft night hours away and every move Cleveland makes carrying enormous weight, Jimmy Haslam has done something that has completely reframed every conversation about the future of this franchise. Something that, on the surface, has nothing to do with the NFL at all. And yet, in every way that matters, it changes everything about how people view the Cleveland Browns' present and future simultaneously. Reports broke this week that Jimmy Haslam is angling to become the controlling owner of the Milwaukee Bucks NBA franchise, pushing for a power play that would consolidate his ownership stake and give him dominant control over one of the most turbulent franchises in professional basketball. Larry Brown Sports. Let that sink in. The owner of the Cleveland Browns, a franchise that has not won a playoff game since the turn of the millennium, that just fired its fifth head coach in 12 years, that is sitting on the most expensive quarterback mistake in NFL history, that has a 5-12 team entering a draft it absolutely cannot afford to get wrong. That owner is right now, in the week of the most important draft in recent franchise history, aggressively pursuing controlling ownership of an NBA team. According to veteran Milwaukee journalist Jerry Wolfel, sources contend Jimmy Haslam III is angling to become the controlling owner of the Bucks franchise, where he currently shares equal power with co-owners Wes Edens and Jamie Dimon. Back in 2023, Haslam had purchased a 25% stake in the Bucks. Yardbarker now, with the Bucks franchise in absolute turmoil, sitting at 32 wins and 49 losses, their worst record in a decade, while simultaneously dealing with a messy, public, toxic situation surrounding superstar Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is publicly feuding with the franchise Yardbarker. Haslam sees an opportunity, a distressed asset, a franchise in crisis where the current ownership structure is fractured and where someone with the right combination of cash, ambition, and leverage can step in and take control. Sound familiar? It should, because it is the exact profile of situation that Jimmy Haslam has spent his entire sports ownership career pursuing. He bought into the Pittsburgh Steelers as a minority stakeholder in 2008 when he saw an opportunity. He acquired the Cleveland Browns in 2012. He purchased the Columbus Crew MLS franchise. He bought into the Bucks. And now, with his personal net worth estimated by Bloomberg at $10.1 billion following the 2024 sale of Pilot Flying J to Berkshire Hathaway for $13.65 billion. He has enormous cash reserves available for exactly this kind of acquisition. Cleveland Browns community. This is not a casual investment. This is not a passive stakeholder quietly holding shares while someone else runs the organization. This is Jimmy Haslam pushing for controlling ownership of an NBA franchise. This is the man who already owns one professional sports franchise in turmoil, the Cleveland Browns, trying to also control another professional sports franchise in turmoil, the Milwaukee Bucks. And the reaction from Cleveland fans has been split between two completely opposite camps. The first camp is horrified. These are the fans who remember every press conference, every "we're committed to winning" speech, every tearful apology for the Watson disaster, every promise that things are going to change. These are the fans who watched Haslam declare Watson a big swing and miss, and then, 1 year later at the same league meetings in front of the same reporters, pivot and say Watson had a great chance and a fresh start with a new coaching staff. These fans see the Bucks power play as confirmation of what they have long feared, that Jimmy Haslam is not a football person trying to win a Super Bowl. He is a billionaire building a sports portfolio, and the Cleveland Browns are just the most prominent and most painful item in his collection. The second camp has a genuinely interesting argument. As one Cleveland area analyst wrote this week, anything that pulls Haslam away from the Browns might actually be what's best for the team. The owner's assumed role in acquiring such rousing success stories as Johnny Manziel, Deshaun Watson, and Shadur Sanders suggests his football capabilities are lacking. While Andrew Berry has done little to inspire confidence, it could be that his inability to make decisions without the owner's weighty input tipping the scales has made him look worse than he truly is. Yahoo Sports. That is the brutal, honest, bleak argument of a fan base that has given up expecting their owner to get better at owning a football team and has instead started hoping he simply gets distracted enough to leave the football people alone. When your best case scenario for the organization is maybe the owner will be too busy with his NBA franchise to ruin this one, that tells you everything about the state of the relationship between Haslam and the Cleveland fan base. But the Bucks power play is only the latest, most spectacular chapter in the ongoing story of Jimmy Haslam's complicated tenure in Cleveland. Because the moves he made in the months leading up to this draft, the public statements, the contradictions, the interference, the coaching hire drama, have each added another layer of chaos to an organization that desperately, urgently, existentially needs stability. Start with the Watson contradiction. At the 2025 NFL annual meetings in Phoenix, just weeks after Watson missed the entire 2025 season with his second Achilles surgery, Haslam stood in front of reporters and called the Watson acquisition a big swing and miss. He said the franchise had to dig themselves out of that hole. Chattanooga Times Free Press, those words traveled around the entire football world within hours. The owner of the Cleveland Browns publicly acknowledging that the defining decision of his franchise's recent history was a failure. It was honest. It was overdue. And it briefly gave Cleveland fans the sense that the man in charge actually understood what had gone wrong and was prepared to move forward without sugarcoating the past. And then, 1 year later, at the exact same meetings in the exact same location, Haslam pivoted completely. He told reporters that Watson had a great chance and a fresh start with new coach Todd Monken. He said Watson had been throwing and working out and was expected to show up for the first day of the offseason program. He said he was excited to see what Watson could do. He talked about Sam Darnold as a redemption blueprint. He essentially rehabilitated the swing and miss narrative with 400 words of cautious optimism about a 30-year-old quarterback who had not taken a meaningful regular season snap since October 2024. Brown zone. Cleveland analysts were merciless in their response. One writer noted that Haslam found himself in an awful and awkward position, having publicly called Watson a mistake while Watson himself was healthy, present, and insisting on a chance to compete for the starting job. The result was a walking back so painful and so transparent that it invited immediate ridicule. 247 Sports. This is the pattern. This is the Jimmy Haslam formula that every Cleveland fan has memorized over 14 years. Honest admission, public contradiction, fresh start language, identical outcome. The carousel spins. The head coaches change. The quarterbacks rotate. The promises get renewed. And the franchise stays stuck. Now, add the coaching hire. When Kevin Stefanski was fired after the 2025 season, a 5-12 campaign that had the offense ranked near the bottom of the entire NFL, the Browns launched what was described as a thorough, data-driven, comprehensive search for a new head coach. They interviewed 10 candidates. They gave homework assignments. They conducted 7-hour interviews. They ran Zoom calls that left observers questioning why no offer had been extended. The underlying story of that coaching search, the one that insiders were whispering about before it became broadly reported, was that Haslam was pushing for what people inside the process called an arranged marriage. The owner reportedly insisted that the new head coach had to keep defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz on staff to maintain continuity on the defensive side of the ball. This directive was creating serious friction between Haslam and Andrew Berry, who reportedly advocated for a more explosive offensive approach to rebuilding the roster. Motorcycle Sports. Candidates withdrew. The search grew longer and messier than it needed to be. And the man who ultimately got the job, Todd Monken, the former Ravens offensive coordinator, was apparently not Berry's first choice. He was Haslam's choice, the seventh head coach of the Haslam era, hired over the GM's preference, starting his tenure with the most critical draft in recent franchise history, leading a team projected dead last in the AFC North, managing a quarterback room that still has no clear answer 18 months after the franchise spent $230 million guaranteed on the wrong answer. Monken is the seventh coach hired under Haslam. The previous 6 compiled that 73-139-1 record, second worst in the NFL. Chattanooga Times Free Press, and yet the machine rolls on. Because in the NFL, owners don't get fired. They don't get replaced. You don't dismiss owners, as the San Francisco 49ers, Jed York once famously noted. Whatever Jimmy Haslam decides, whether it's a coaching hire, an NBA power grab, a public contradiction about Deshaun Watson, the Cleveland Browns have to live with it. And right now, with draft night hours away, the most important living with it moment of the entire Haslam era is about to arrive. Because the decisions Andrew Berry makes in Pittsburgh over the next 3 days, what they do with pick 6, whether they trade down with Dallas, how they build around or away from Shedeur Sanders, how they address the offensive line and the receiving core, all of those decisions carry the weight of 14 years of Haslam ownership. All the failed coaches, all the quarterback disasters, all the contradictions and the walkbacks and the "we're committed to winning" speeches that never quite delivered what they promised. Let's be specific about what is actually on the line. The Browns will pay Deshaun Watson a $46 million salary in 2026. His total cap charge, factoring in all the restructuring and moving of money, still amounts to one of the most punishing financial commitments in the league for a player who has barely played in 4 years. ESPN, every dollar of that guarantee came from a decision that Haslam himself championed, a decision that was, in his own words, a big swing and miss. And yet Watson is still on the roster, still competing for the starting job, still collecting money that Cleveland cannot get back. Meanwhile, the organization has spent 2 draft picks on quarterbacks, Dillon Gabriel in the 3rd round and Shedeur Sanders in the 5th round, producing a room of 3 quarterbacks competing for one job, while the offensive line that surrounds them has crumbled to pieces. The Browns let multiple offensive linemen walk in free agency, including Pro Bowl guard Wyatt Teller, without fully replacing them, creating a situation where they may be forced to use their most valuable draft asset on a tackle out of pure positional need rather than taking the best available player. Steeler Nation. And the Myles Garrett situation. The Myles Garrett situation, which has been the defining subplot of the entire offseason, became directly connected to Haslam's leadership when the Browns modified Garrett's contract in a way that immediately set off alarm bells across the league. Haslam was then forced to step in front of reporters at the league meetings and call Garrett a unicorn, arguing that players like him do not come along very much and that he would remain an integral part of the Cleveland Browns organization. Pro Football Network. Haslam insisted he was absolutely convinced that Garrett was committed to staying in Cleveland, while simultaneously acknowledging that Garrett wasn't the type of player who was in real close contact with the organization during the offseason. He's not the kind of guy that's there all the time and calls you every week. That's just different styles. It's fine. Yardbarker. Let's read that one more time. The owner of the Cleveland Browns is defending the fact that the best player on his roster, the man who just set the NFL single-season sack record, the man they gave a $160 million extension to after he requested a trade, is not in close contact with the organization. It's fine, Haslam says. That's just different styles. Is it fine? Is it really fine that the face of your franchise, the cornerstone of your defense, the player you are publicly insisting is not being traded, is not calling, is not coming by, is not in real close contact with the people who run his team? Because when a player with Myles Garrett's leverage and Myles Garrett's contract and Myles Garrett public profile is maintaining that kind of distance, that is not nothing. That is a message. And the fact that the owner of the franchise is characterizing it as different styles rather than addressing it head-on tells you something about how this organization processes uncomfortable truths. Meanwhile, a Hall of Famer has publicly ripped both the Browns and head coach Todd Monken for their treatment of Shedeur Sanders. Yardbarker, the Browns' coaching search was chaotic enough to drive multiple candidates away. Their offensive line is a question mark. Their trade rumors have expanded from Myles Garrett to Shedeur Sanders to draft picks to veterans and back again. And now their owner is making a power grab for an NBA franchise in the middle of the most important week of his football tenure. The reaction from one Cleveland area writer was pointed. Jimmy Haslam has all of the meddling traits of the Cowboys' Jerry Jones without even bringing the absurdly hilarious one-liners that at least make you chuckle through the pain. Yahoo Sports, that is a devastating comparison and an accurate one. Jerry Jones' Dallas Cowboys, for all their dysfunction and their decades without a Super Bowl, are at least entertaining in their chaos. Jerry Jones is a character. He generates stories that have warmth and humor and personality. Jimmy Haslam generates stories that have bureaucratic interference, contradicted public statements, and the quiet, grinding despair of a fan base that keeps believing and keeps getting disappointed. But here's the most important question. The one that everything else orbits around as draft night approaches. Does any of this actually matter for what happens in Pittsburgh on Thursday? The answer, infuriatingly, is it depends on how much Haslam actually influences the decisions Barry makes in that war room. If Barry has genuine autonomy, if the Bucks power play and the coaching search interference and the Watson contradiction and the Garrett unicorn speech are all symptoms of an owner who is involved in the macro decisions but trusts his football people on draft night specifics, then the chaos of the last 3 months doesn't necessarily follow Cleveland into the building in Pittsburgh. Barry can still execute a smart draft. He can still trade down or up or stay put. He can still build around Shedeur Sanders or choose a different direction. He can still make the decisions that determine whether 2026 is the year Cleveland finally turns the corner. But if Haslam's influence extends into the war room, if his stated enthusiasm for Watson's great chance shapes how they build the draft around the quarterback position, if his unicorn defense of Garrett influences whether they address the edge rusher position or trade him, if his Bucks distraction means he's pulling phone calls and attention away from the biggest football decision his franchise has faced in years, then the chaos is not external. The chaos is in the building. The chaos is in the room where the decisions get made. Haslam said at the league meetings, "We'd be remiss if we didn't start by saying that we share our fans' frustration. The last 2 seasons have not been good. We're not fun to watch. And I just want to let the fans know that D and I, JW, Whitney, our entire organization feel their pain, and we're 1,000% committed to getting this fixed and getting it right." He added, "What we've done in the last few years is not acceptable. Brown zone, not acceptable." His word. The owner of the Cleveland Browns, sitting in Phoenix at the NFL owners' meetings, using the word not acceptable to describe his own franchise's performance under his own ownership. It is the most honest thing Jimmy Haslam has ever said publicly about the Browns. And it is the most damning. Because if the last several years are not acceptable, then the question that follows, unavoidably, urgently, loudly, is this: what is going to make 2026 different? What structural change has been made? What decision has been made differently? The Bucks' power play says Haslam's attention is divided. The coaching search process says his interference is ongoing. The Watson walkback says his public communications are still managed by the twin pressures of honesty and damage control pulling in opposite directions. The Myles Garrett situation says the franchise's best player is maintaining studied distance from an organization that has not yet earned his full trust. And yet, here is what is also true. Todd Monken is not nothing. He is the offensive coordinator who helped build the most dangerous offense in the NFL around Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. He is a man who spent 3 seasons learning from one of the most sophisticated football operations in the league. He is a first-time head coach at 59 years old who has waited his entire career for this opportunity and has every possible motivation to make it work. Chattanooga Times Free Press. Andrew Barry is not nothing. For all the criticism and all the failed quarterback decisions and all the trade chaos, the 2025 draft class he built was extraordinary. Carson Schweissinger, Mason Graham, the defensive infrastructure that enabled Myles Garrett's record-breaking season. Barry builds defenses brilliantly. He identifies talent. He has accumulated 9 draft picks and 2 first-rounders for Thursday night. And Shedeur Sanders is not nothing. The 5th-round pick who earned a Pro Bowl nod. The quarterback whose locker room believes in him more than they believe in the $230 million man. The player who told his father not to visit training camp until he had something worth watching, and then went out and made himself worth watching in exactly the way that mattered. The ingredients for something real are present in Cleveland. The talent is there. The draft capital is there. The coaching staff intelligence is there. What is uncertain, what has always been uncertain in the Haslam era, is whether the organizational structure, the ownership culture, the pattern of interference and contradiction and fresh start speeches that never quite deliver, whether all of that can be overcome by the football people doing their jobs correctly in the most important 72 hours of the season. Tonight, Jimmy Haslam's shocking move to grab controlling ownership of the Milwaukee Bucks will be discussed on every sports radio station in Cleveland. Every analyst will ask the same question: is this good or bad for the Browns? Does it mean less meddling? Or does it mean a distracted owner at the most critical possible moment? And the answer, the honest, complete, unvarnished answer, is that nobody knows. Because Jimmy Haslam has been the most unpredictable, most contradictory, most genuinely confusing owner in professional football for 14 consecutive years. He called Watson a swing and miss, and then said Watson had a great chance. He pushed for an arranged marriage in the coaching search and then hired the man his GM reportedly didn't want. He called Garrett a unicorn, while Garrett was keeping his distance from the building. And now, on the eve of the 2026 NFL Draft, he is angling for controlling ownership of an NBA franchise that is hemorrhaging games and dealing with its own superstar drama. This is Jimmy Haslam. This is the Cleveland Browns. And this, all of it, the chaos and the contradiction and the brilliant moments and the inexplicable failures, is the story of a franchise that keeps finding new ways to make the football world pay attention, even when the attention is the wrong kind. Draft night is hours away. The clock is ticking in Pittsburgh, and somewhere in the overlap between Cleveland's NFL future and Milwaukee's NBA drama, Jimmy Haslam is making phone calls that the entire football world is watching with the same mixture of fascination, dread, and helpless amusement that has defined the Cleveland Browns experience since 2012. Warning, ending plus disclaimer. Jimmy Haslam has 14 years of decisions behind him. He has the Watson disaster. He has 7 head coaches. He has trade rumors, coaching search chaos, quarterback competition drama, and now an NBA power grab on the eve of the most important draft in recent franchise memory. What happens tonight in Pittsburgh, and what Haslam's role in it truly is, will define this franchise for years to come. Pushpin disclaimer. This video is based on publicly available reports, official statements, press conference transcripts, and documented news developments surrounding Jimmy Haslam, the Cleveland Browns, and the Milwaukee Bucks as of April 2026. All information is based on reporting available at time of publication and is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only.